backbone.ai. It's it's a data automation platform. Um, I'm gonna admit this person. It's a data automation platform focused on supply chain data. Basically, what it means is that we automate all of the integration, all of the quality assessment, and also the transformation between distributors and suppliers. We're focused, very focused on the industrial products vertical currently, but plan to expand. It's a startup, so as we onboard more verticals, we're going to be focusing on different industries. I have been in product management for about 10 years. I started my career basically wanting to be an economist. So it's a little bit of a transition story where I started as an economist, worked at the United Nations for 6 months as a young professional, was very bored with all of the work that I did because it was very research focused and not creative. Ended up working on developing a website, and that was the most fun part of my job. So went back to school, got my degree in technology, and pivoted into more of a tech track kind of a role. So that's a little bit of a background in terms of how I ended up in AI. It's a very similar story, which is a couple of years ago, I worked at Ziff Davis, which is the parent company for Mashable, for PC Mag, for Computer Tech. And so we had multiple brands, IGN, I managed Mashable and PC Mag and Computer Shopper and Geek.com. And it had been a couple of years I'd been working in media. I was starting to feel like I was doing the same thing over and over again every day in terms of growing the audience, growing the product, and I was starting to get a little restless. So at that point in time, what ended up happening was that we acquired Mashable. So Mashable wasn't a part of the company when I had joined. And with the Mashable acquisition, we inherited a data science team, a world-class data scientists, 2 machine learning engineers. And, I actually got on-the-job training, working with them, kind of trying to figure out, okay, so we have this data science team. What are the use cases for AI for a media company for all of these brands that I'm managing? So I've jumped ahead a little bit, but I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of an overview of kind of how I got into product and what motivated the change or the pivot being in product management to being more of an AI product manager. So I was fortunate that I got the chance to experience it at work. But I think the takeaway for this entire talk is going to be, and again, I'm jumping ahead, but the takeaway is please get your hands dirty as soon as you can. Work on an um, actual widget, actual product, actual solution that is AI powered. Because one of the things I've noticed, because a lot of my friends who are also in product management, we end up having this conversation where they'll say, how do I start? And they end up taking a lot of courses, and the courses are great. But what you really need to do to understand how to start using AI in your products is to just dive in, get your hands dirty, and I'll talk a little bit about how you can do that further in the talk. Okay, so let's start here. Can you guys see my screen? Just making sure everyone can see. I moved on to.
Yes.
The next slide. Okay, awesome. So let's start with basically why, why AI, why is it important? Why should we really um, think about at least being data literate, AI literate, even if it's not required in our jobs today as product people, right? So I think if you guys have done any kind of courses or classes online, you know that Professor Andrew Ng from Stanford is basically the godfather of AI, for lack of a better term. He is the foremost thought leader in the industry, and he's also the founder of Coursera, and he strongly believes that AI is the new electricity. And when he says that AI is the new electricity, what he's referring to is the industrial revolution, right? So moving on to the next slide. Um, from Professor Andrew Ng's perspective, the first industrial revolution was, as we all know, steam-based machines, and that's kind of what started industrialization because there were railways and you could move materials from one part to another, and you could also, transport the manufactured items from one part of the country or one part of the world to another part. So he is thinking about it in a very specific way. And he's saying that first there were steam-based engines, and they, leapfrogged us into the era of the first industrial revolution. After that, there was electricity, which really, truly ensured that, we had moved into this new era of production and distribution. And after that, the biggest pivot or the biggest change has been computer and internet-based knowledge for the past 20, 25 years, 30 years. And now we're moving into this fourth industrial revolution, for lack of a better term, era, which comprises of AI, big data, and to a much lesser extent, blockchain. But these are the upcoming trends that are going to be transforming industries as we know them. So, let me see. So when we say AI is the new electricity, inherently what we're trying to say is that there is going to be an AI use case for all of the industries sooner or later, right? And even today, some of the things that we can see for different industries are some of these use cases. So, for example, manufacturing, retail, healthcare, travel and hospitality, financial services, energy, feedstock, and utilities. When you think about these six different industries, you may not think that all of them are going to have the same sort of use cases or may have AI applications. But as you can see, I've worked in retail previously. So I've worked at Saks Fifth and Saks Off Fifth and Hudson's Bay. And you would be surprised at the number of AI use cases that exist in retail. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit more later on in the talk. Now I'm currently working with, industrial supply products. So we're working in manufacturing. And again, there's so many potential use cases for data automation, predictive maintenance, demand forecasting, which is one of the things that we're looking at, process optimization, which is one of the things that we're looking at. So whatever industry that you're working in or whatever industry you want to work in, my recommendation would be to kind of following the news and, trying to understand, okay, in the year 2021, what are the pain points for these industries? What is leading to a slowdown in their productivity? And are there AI use cases that would actually help them to either increase revenue or reduce costs? So, being product managers, I know that you guys know this. We're always looking at monetization from these two lenses, right? So we're always saying, okay, how do I bring in more audience or more users or more customers? How do I reduce friction so I have more customers and increase revenue? Or how do I reduce friction in our user journey, in our workflows, so that the users that we do have, they return more. So I think it's a very similar concept where when we're thinking about monetization and AI specifically, we're always thinking about, okay, if I implement this AI use case or solution, does it increase revenue in some capacity, in some way? Are we automating something that previously would have required us to hire a team of 50 people? So now we don't have to hire an additional 50 people, but we can still automate this process? Or are we, optimizing, for example, our supply chain? And is that going to save us money in terms of the number of days or in terms of the inventory that's being held? So that's always the two ways of looking at if you can get senior leadership to buy into your AI use cases. Okay. I wanted to touch a little bit on, what some of the consulting firm surveys are currently showing in terms of the impact of AI on industry and also the rate of adoption. So one of the things that I noticed actually yesterday when I was trying to put these slides together, and I did not know this beforehand, is that since 2018, so 2018, 2019, 2020, which is not a long time, there's been a 25% year over year increase in the use of AI across a variety of industries. So before 2018, there was not that much applied AI being used in industry. People were confused. They were thinking, oh, we need data scientists. We need to hire data scientists, and they're going to come in and they're going to look at our business and they're going to figure out what the AI use cases are. But I feel like now the industry is getting more and more standardized. People kind of know, okay, these are the basic AI use cases, and does it make sense for us to implement? And we've kind of gone from, maybe not completely, but we're moving away from early adopters into the era of mass implementation. So based on this study and a few other studies that I was looking at, I strongly believe within the next 5 years, AI implementations and AI use cases are going to be very commonplace, simply because, it seems like we're on a little bit of a hockey curve path, and early adopters are kind of done and they've shown enough value where other companies in the same industry are looking at them and saying, hey, if, Amazon is doing this and they're automating their supply chain, how do we figure out how to do it for ourselves? So again, there's been a big year over year increase. And like I said earlier, the result of that increase has been an uptick in revenue, and 44% of those surveyed, the executives surveyed at those companies, said that AI has reduced costs. So from an executive perspective, it's always the bottom line. That's always the easiest way to sell it. Now, I know this screen, I don't know how much you guys can see. It's a fairly complicated infographic, but I wanted to include it. Basically, what's happening here is in the right-hand column, the plus 17, plus 11, plus 8, these are all percentage points increase in the adoption of a relevant AI technology. At the top, you can see, the most popular AI categories are robotic process automation, computer vision, machine learning, natural language text, so NLP, virtual agents or conversational interfaces, physical robotics, natural language speech is here, natural language generation, and autonomous vehicles. So all of these different AI categories or technologies, and then the industries that are getting impacted. So high tech, of course, automotive and assembly, telecom, travel, transport. So kind of, I don't really want to go into it in too much detail, but it's essentially the top 10, top 15 industries are all being impacted to different degrees by different AI technologies or categories. So please look up this report. It's by McKinsey and Company. I think it's called The Age of AI. Um, has a lot of really interesting statistics in it. I just wanted to make the point of um, when we think about AI and we think about, for example, electric power and natural gas, our initial thought may be, okay, the industry is lagging. They're not really, going to be applying the same techniques as high tech, for example. But when you look at this chart, you see that electric power and natural gas is using and is trying to adopt robotic process automation in a fairly, increased way as opposed to 2, 3, 4 years ago. So moving on. So, like I said earlier, I think the answer to why AI is you see the industry trends, you see an increasing amount of data being generated by all of these industries because now everyone is digital first, right? So the shift to digital or the shift to computers has already happened as part of the third industrial revolution, which means that there's a lot more data being generated as opposed to 10, 15, 20 years ago. You see that everyone is seeing these increases in revenue or reduction in costs. So it's a trend that's kind of expanding, and you see the massive acceleration over the past 2 years. So, from my perspective, why AI is you want to failure proof your career, right? Because in a couple of years, basically, what this means is that if you're a product manager within the next 5 years, sooner or later, you're going to end up in charge of an AI product. And what is going to happen when that happens? Unless you know how to build, how to define and build an AI powered product, um, you're not going to be able to deliver the ROI for that product, right? You're not going to be able to maintain it. You're not going to be able to deliver it. You're definitely not going to be able to build it. And for me, this happened 3 years ago. And it was an easier time because the industry had not accelerated at that point. So for me, the senior executives more or less asked me to figure out what to do with the data science team and figure out a use case. And so it was a lot of self learning, but it was on the job learning, and there was not a lot of high expectations because, again, AI was not that commonly used in all media companies in New York City. So it was a low bar, it was easier to clear. But within the next 5 years, this is not going to be the case. So, not to sound like an alarmist, but I think if you really want to failure proof, your career as a product person, now is the time to start becoming more and more data literate, AI literate. Okay. Okay. So now that, we've discussed why we should all be learning AI and paying attention, I think we can talk a little bit about what does it mean when we say AI. So the term AI has been around, I think, since the 50s or 60s. It's basically, the concept is, sorry. The concept is that it's any kind of machine, and this is a very generic, abstract concept. Any kind of machine that perceives its environment and then, kind of learns from the actions it takes and improves over time. So I think it's sort of a high level abstract idea that there's artificial intelligence, that you feed it some data, and then it takes some actions on it, and then it learns from it and it improves over time. And one of the things that I kind of want to say here is that a lot of times when you hear AI powered, they're basically machine learning powered applications or widgets or tools. So in today's world, AI and ML are used very, very interchangeably. But just to clarify, AI is the generic term. Machine learning is a subset, as it says here, of AI techniques, right? So there's like a bunch of classification, regression, clustering, different kind of models or algorithms that come from statistics or are statistics based, that enable machines to improve with experiences. And then deep learning is further a subset of machine learning. So for example, if you have and neural networks are like a subset of deep learning. So for example, if you have a CNN based recommender system and you call it AI powered, completely reasonable, completely acceptable, because basically you're talking about the subset of a subset of a subset. But at the end of the day, that is AI. Okay. Okay. So just to clarify a little bit further, machine learning, branch of AI, subset of AI, focused on building applications that learn from data, improve their accuracy over time without being programmed to do so. Same. I'm going to move on. Okay, so here's kind of something that I wanted to clarify a little bit, which is, a lot of times I've gotten questions from other people where there's confusion around, okay, so, and it's usually come from my engineering teams that are kind of onboarding onto AI. And this is usually the conversation that we kind of end up having, which is traditional programming versus machine learning, right? So in a traditional programming role, what you do is you have a bunch of information, you write up a recipe, which is basically your code, and then you run the information through the code and you get your answer, or you get your layout, or you get your, your solution set. So machine learning, it's a little bit, I don't really want to say reversed, but it's basically the same three things, but the order it changes up. So here, what you do is you take your data, you run it through your model, you look at the results, you tweak, and the feedback basically tells you if you should use another model, or if you should stick with this and tweak it. So there's no handcrafted code in machine learning. Normally, in traditional programming, you're writing code. In machine learning, you're using models. So just at a very high level, kind of wanted to make that point. The slides that I've taken here are from Google's chief decision. I forget her exact title. Her name is Cassie Kozyrkov. She has a bunch of material online. She's done a lot of talks. She's, I think, Google's chief decision scientist. If I remember correctly, that's what her title is. But she's done like a lot of deep dives into this. So if you guys want to look this up in a lot more detail, I would recommend check her out. Okay. Now that we've kind of defined why should we follow AI, what is AI, what does it mean, let's get down a little bit to the nitty gritty, which is today, what can machine learning do? So, what are the most common applications of machine learning? So here, as you can see, you know, if you look at the middle column, are there human faces, 0 or 1? Will they repay the loan? Will user click on an ad? Basically, what all of these are classification problems, right? These are all yes or no problems. You're saying, yes, there are human faces, no, there are no human faces, or yes, the users will click on an ad or not. So there's a lot of classification problems that can be very quickly automated through machine learning or AI. Now, speech recognition is another one. And, transcript of audio clip, French sentence, these are both natural language processing and using the appropriate model to figure it out. Preventative maintenance, is it about to fail, is predictive, right? So there's a lot of different categories of use cases or things. And one of the big categories is also predictive. So kind of taking the existing data, the existing inputs, running it through a model, and then predicting outcome for future interactions or future actions. So, again, predictive, if you want to predict house prices, for example, uh, because of the impact of COVID in New York City, that's a totally feasible, doable use case for machine learning. And then self-driving cars, this is a little bit out of my area of expertise because I haven't really worked on any self-driving cars, but there's a great course on Udacity with Sebastian Thrun, which I would highly recommend that you guys watch if at any point you're planning on going and working at Tesla um, or on the Google self-driving car, but clearly a very valid use case for AI. Okay, so now, and this is a little bit towards the end of my talk, but basically, now that we all know what the situation is, why we should do it, uh, the question, kind of becomes okay, how do I transition from being a product manager today to an AI product manager, maybe in my next role, maybe in 2 years? But what are the first steps that I need to take? Um, so here I have a little question for you guys, and obviously there are no wrong answers. But what do you guys think is common between a product designer and an AI product manager? Can anyone tell me? Any guesses?
Probably both of them are trying to come up with something new that is currently not existing in the market.
That's a good guess. Anybody else? Okay.
Or
So
maybe I probably have another one. So maybe just they're trying to utilize the space they have in a much more efficient and an effective manner.
that is also very true. So you've actually introduced two additional concepts for me to think about. But the direction that I was going in with this was, the biggest commonality between a product designer and an AI product manager today is they both need work portfolios. Because if you walk into an interview today and you say, well, I've done the Coursera course, I've done the Udacity course, I've done the Udemy course, I've done this, that, and the other, but you don't have a completed um, AI powered widget project initiative that you can point to and say, I put this together. I put a content recommender system together, or I, put together something that predicts churn for an e-commerce platform, or something or another, or maybe I put together a predictive algorithm or a predictive model for housing prices due to the impact of COVID. So whatever it is, right? But the first thing today to get hired as an AI product manager is to have a few different, one or two, it doesn't have to be a lot, and from my observation and experience, but you need something that you've done, um, and you need to put it in your work portfolio. Okay, so again, kind of moving on to the next slide, I'm, re-emphasizing the same point, which is get hands-on experience. So, a quick and easy way to start if you're absolutely completely new to AI is this Coursera course, AI for Everyone. It's very short, very easy to do. I did it over a weekend. I think they recommend 4 weeks. It definitely does not take 4 weeks. You can quickly power through it in a week. Then, my advice would be watch this if you're absolutely new, pick an industry, maybe the industry you're working in, research what the pain points are, how AI could actually make an impact. If you want some inspiration in terms of the different things that can be implemented with AI, go check out this experiments with Google AI link. If you want, or if you need a data set to run through a model and you're like, well, I don't have any data, I don't know how to scrape, you can go to Kaggle. Even though scraping data is also relatively simple nowadays, but you don't need to do that. You can just simply go to Kaggle, pick up a data set there. If you want to look at a bunch of pre-trained models in different languages, so you're like, okay, what does, I want this model, but I want it to work with Python versus, uh, I'm completely blanking. In any case, just go to Model Zoo, check out all of the different pre-trained models for all of the different languages. And then, if you really have kind of gotten to a point where like, okay, I'm comfortable with all of these things, I really want to know how to build my first simple model, go to Kaggle, try out Intro to Machine Learning. Again, and my advice is finish a side project. And also, if you can, advocate for an AI initiative at work. Put together your research, think through the pain points, think of different AI models that you could potentially use. Think of some out of the box solutions. Google Cloud has a bunch. They're not the most affordable, but again, it depends on buy-in from your senior executives and how severe the pain point is. And again, when you're working on buy-in from your senior leadership, it's always easy to get buy-in for something that is a buy versus a build, right? Because when you say, I want to work on, implementing this AI initiative at work, and you don't have an out of the box solution that you can point to and say, well, it's going to cost us this amount of money per month. And we can really validate if it, solves the problem that we have. Um, it's going to be an uphill battle to get headcount to hire a data science team unless you've already validated the pain point and the solution that is AI powered. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so here I just quickly wanted to touch on, the kind of things that I've worked on. So for example, for Mashable and PC Mag, I worked on a content recommender system. Most recently, before Backbone, I worked at, like I mentioned, Saks and Saks Fifth, and there our main goal or our main use case was churn prediction and reduction. So it was take the data from all of the brick and mortar stores and also our e-commerce websites and kind of figure out what is the rate of return. So what is the rate of churn, and then how do we actually reduce the rate of returns, right? And then churn prediction more in a e-commerce sense of how many of our customers are not repeats and are churning out. So there was a big focus on optimizing, our current flows and kind of figuring out ways to keep the money that we had already earned, and so that we didn't get the return. So that was our primary goal there. I don't really want to talk too much about backbone AI, but we're, again, like I mentioned earlier, we're working on data automation there. So if you take even a single industry, for example, retail in this case, again, we worked on personalized offers for our e-commerce platforms. We worked on churn prediction. There was a little bit of a use case around fraud detection that was not under my team, it was another team. We were thinking about working on sentiment analysis next. So taking and aggregating all of our social media posts and kind of looking at, consumer sentiment. So looking at our social media, looking at our user surveys, looking at our help desk chats, and kind of analyzing, okay, what is the overall sentiment of our customers towards our the products that we're selling and our e-commerce experience, and then what are the insights once we have that, and how do we improve. Okay. Now, AI product management. So these are my last two slides. What I wanted to quickly touch on before we wrap up is that um, just because it's AI product management does not mean that it's not product management. We are still starting from product management 101, which is jobs to be done. So we're still thinking about, okay, for this AI use case, who is our target customer? What are their needs? What is the problem domain? Where are they searching for solutions today? So what are the alternatives? What are the solutions they currently use? What is the core value of our product? What is our growth or North Star metric? So I just want to kind of emphasize that because, again, I've seen sometimes new product managers, when they start on their first AI product, and I'm guilty of that as well. You kind of get, carried away. You're thinking more about data and you're not thinking about it holistically. So you're not thinking about, okay, this is the data set that I have. If I am coming up with these three use cases, how do they meet the needs of the customer? Because you're so excited about the data set and you're so focused on what the data can and cannot provide that you sometimes are not tying it back to customer needs. So again, the point of the slide is, please, you're still product managers. It's still about customer pain points. It's still about figuring out your customer segments, their needs, their the solutions that they're using today and what they should be using. And it's still about how is this AI powered functionality going to impact our North Star metric. All of that does not go away simply because it's AI. And lastly, this is something I'm going to briefly touch on, but what, when you are doing AI product management, it's basically an extension of your product management goals. And now you're thinking a little bit more about, the infrastructure in addition to user customer goals in addition to your North Star metric. And you're also thinking about resourcing, because a lot of times applied AI happens in pre AI companies, right? So, for example, Backbone AI is a company that started with a AI focused product. But a lot of times, for example, at Ziff Davis, when I worked there, it was a pre AI company, and we had to figure out how to introduce AI into our existing practices. So when you're at a bigger company, you're at a pre AI company, um, there needs to be quite a bit of focus on resourcing. And if you're going to have the engineering resources to set up the infrastructure, if you're going to have the engineering resources for front end integration, if you're going to have the engineering resources for the continuous training cycle. And so I'm going to quickly touch through some of these things, but basically for applied AI product management, you're thinking about the use case, and that is, we've all heard the term minimum viable product. And I think for ML, what we really need to start talking about a viable machine learning use case. And when I say viable, it's taking into account all of the different things that I just talked about, which is, do you have the resources? Do you have the buy-in? Do you have the data? Do you have the infrastructure, either already existing or the team to build it? So all of that kind of defines if it's viable, and then also if it has an impact, and what is the impact, and does it tie to the North Star metric? So just quickly going through this list, it's you know what will your system's outputs be? Why are they worth having for the user? Do you have the data that you need? You need enough data for training, validation, and testing, because you're going to split your data into these three buckets. Um, do you have access to hardware? Do you have, a cloud that you can kind of bum off of? Or do you need to get, again, buy-in to get a cloud service? Do you have GPUs, maybe on local machines, or maybe in the cloud? So what kind of hybrid architecture, cloud architecture, what do you have in place? What do you need to get? Do you have, like I mentioned earlier, engineering resources? And then, can the senior leadership team or your stakeholders agree on the metrics for the success of the machine learning model, right? Because as we all know, machine learning models may be running at 85% accuracy, they may run at 90%. They're never going to be, almost never going to be 100%. So if you say, I've predicted these prices, but they are 90% correct, is that something that your stakeholders and your senior executive team, are they okay with that? Do they accept it? Or do they come back and say, well, 90% is not good enough. It needs to be 95% or 99%. There needs to be some upfront agreement in terms of the level of accuracy. And then very, very quickly, recall and precision. So out of accuracy, recall and precision, what is the metric that your data scientist or your machine learning engineer, whoever your data science team is, what are they um, focusing on? And then how do they plan to achieve it? And then again, some upfront agreement on what is the level of accuracy. And when we say precision, it's basically, from a data set, how many selected items are relevant to whatever our problem is or whatever we're trying to solve. And then recall is more how many, I always mix these two up, but it's how many relevant items are selected. So precision and recall are a little bit opposite of each other, where precision is how many selected items are relevant, and recall is how many relevant items are selected, right? And you guys can do a little bit more digging if that's interesting to you. There's a lot of material around this online. But basically, this is a conversation that you need to have with your data science team and your senior leadership team to make sure everyone is aligned, everyone knows what level of accuracy the model is going to run on. So, when it's time to actually deploy the model and push it out live, there's no disagreements. Okay, so that is it for me. Thank you so much. Piyush?
Yes. Thanks a lot, Sarah, for such an insightful session. I hope every one of us have got some good takeaways from today's session. There are a few questions in chat section. So if we have 5-10 minutes, we can start with the Q&A.
Sure.
Yeah. So first one is from Pratik. What are the typical job related to AI?
So, okay. So what are, I'm sorry, Piyush, can you repeat the question?
Yes. It's what are typical jobs related to AI?
So what are the typical jobs for product people or just generally roles?
Uh, Pratik, if you can type in or speak up. Okay, we can take next question meanwhile. It's from Pratiksha. How an AI engineer or data scientist can acquire skills for managing AI product as well?
So that's a good question. So if you're an AI engineer or a machine learning engineer, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming how would they move into kind of managing the overall product, the AI product, right? So
Yeah.
if yes, okay. So if that is the case, basically that is the the role that manages the AI product overall is the AI product manager. And I would say, if you're already an AI or a machine learning engineer, then you know the AI part very, very well. That's my assumption. So then what remains is to really work on your product management skills. And for product management, a good starting point, I've been doing it for so long that it's a little hard for me to, you know, come up with a starting point. But one of the things that's really helped me continuously learn over the past 4 or 5 years is product school. So I would highly recommend if you want to pick up, you know, more and more on product management to start following product school. I think they post all of their videos on YouTube. They talk to the absolute best 0.1% of product managers in the world, and all of those sessions are posted. So it's a really invaluable resource. But in terms of product management, start thinking of how should you put a roadmap together? Uh, how do you prioritize? How do you, become the person who can work cross-functionally with different teams and get them to agree to the roadmap, get feedback from them, get use cases from them, add them to your roadmap, your backlog, and prioritize. So I think that would be kind of how I would approach it. And I'm sure there's a lot of product management courses as well. I just have not done any of them because I haven't needed to. So um, yeah, I would not be able to tell you which one is the best.
Thank you.
Uh, so next one is from Zeba. I am doing PhD in AI focused on robot vision. I want to break into AI product management role. What are the set of transferable skills required for this role?
Uh, so transferable, I think the biggest. So from a product management perspective, right, as I talked about in our slide, you still have to tie back to, because what is a product manager? A product manager is basically, so there's like a lot of different definitions. I'm sure you guys have all heard is the CEO of the product. That is absolutely not correct. I've been working as a product person for 10 years. I can tell you that's not true. A product manager, a product leader, first and foremost, is the voice of the customer. Your role in any organization is to make sure that the user goals and the business goals align, right? Because if you work in product management, you know that there's a bunch of things that you need to deliver to make the user happy and to keep them engaged with the product. But then there's a bunch of business goals. So, for example, we need to monetize to X extent. We need this many users. We need whatever, blah blah blah, that are internal to the company, and that all of the teams also need to hit. So, this alignment between user goals and business goals, that's 101 as a product person. And I think the second thing that is very, very critical or very, very crucial for a product manager is, do not think that you're the CEO. You will not get to make decisions. Think of yourself as a coach. You're the coach who's coaching all of the teams to kind of come together and work together to deliver value to your customer. So, from a product management perspective, I think these are the things that you really need to focus on, and then kind of look at your PhD experience and see, okay, how much cross functional work do I do here? How, because, PhD work may be focused more on, again, like I said, a lot of product managers make this mistake when they move into AI product management, which is, this is the data set that I have. What can I do with it? So, my advice would be to not fall into that hole, and always keep your eye on your customer or the end user who's actually going to be using your solution.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify with what you said. So I've been like doing this nuclear robotics, and in my research, I was actually able to come up with this product of robot which could just like we could reduce the value a lot by doing certain experiments. And
Okay.
so I should highlight that more in CV. And you were talking about how I was able to establish cross-functional collaboration between labs, which was not present previously, like these kind of transferable skills.
Yeah. So actually, that sounds really great. So if you
And
were
just and just one more question, if you could like answer it together. So when you come from an academic background, like you have a very long CV with your publications and everything, but what is like a standard CV when you're getting into product management role? Is it like 1 page, or can I go up to 2 page or something with this sort?
So I think for product management, usually the rule of thumb is it can never be more than 2 pages. But if you have 5 years of experience or less, it should be 1 page. So once you hit 6 years, 7 years, so for example, my CV is 2 pages long. But normally if someone's had 5 years of experience or less, it's usually 1 page. So if you're applying for product management roles, that would be my feedback. But since you're coming from PhD, it may extend to 2, but I would say just make sure it doesn't go over 2.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So next one is from Noreen. What are some example challenges to anticipate and prepare for when you are working with your data scientist partners in a company that is newly introducing AI solutions?
That's a good question. So it's yeah. So I think the biggest challenge when you start working off with a data scientist, it's not a challenge. I think it's important for product managers. It's a skill that product managers need to have with everyone in the company, but you need to really work on building a relationship with your cross-functional stakeholders, right? So your data scientist is one of the cross-functional stakeholders because they're one of the people that you have to work with. So advice number one would be to build a relationship. And what I mean by that is do not always talk to them just about work. Also talk to them, as people, as fellow employees. So I think that's step number one. Step number two is with data scientists, and it's not always the case. I've worked with both kinds. But sometimes they tend to look at product managers as being very non-technical. Or that maybe they don't understand the AI landscape. So I think kind of brush up on your AI ML knowledge. And when you go to them, if you're coming up with different use cases, make sure that you show them why the use cases make sense. I think that's number two. Number three is that a lot of times data scientists come, with their own pet projects, right? So they really want to work on a certain platform or they really want to build out a certain functionality. So I'll give you a small example, which is one of the data scientists that I worked with. He really wanted to work on an image quality tool. So the image quality tool made sense up to a certain point, but then he kind of went into background clutter in the image. He went into, different, what did he call it? Different artifacts in the image. He went into a lot of details that were not going to be beneficial for the simple automated image quality assessment tool that we were building, right? Because the tool that we were building was coming from the customers where they're asking us, okay, we need something where we can quickly upload an image and see if if there's any pixelation and if it's clear enough so we can put it on our website. So it was a simple scoped use case, but then our data scientist wanted to expand it and turn it into a 6-month project. So those conversations are a little bit trickier, and having like a good working relationship really helps with those. But in order to approach something like that, you always have to start with, okay, this is a great idea, but how does it tie back to our use case? And are we going above what we need to do? Or should we roll it out as an MVP, see the level of adoption by our customers, and then see if there's additional asks, then we roll out the additional asks. So just because it's an AI powered product or functionality does not mean that you throw out MVP and you throw out your product management strategies. So I think those are some of the things that you need to keep in mind. I don't know if I answered your question or went into too much detail.
Yes, I think that's all for today. This was the last question, so we can wind up the session here. Once again, thanks a lot, Sarah, for taking out time and conducting such an insightful session for pragmatic leaders. Guys, before we end today's session, I would like to quickly tell you we run multiple product management and AI programs. They are completely practical, starting from people who are looking to transition or who are looking to upskill. They are completely project based, and we have multiple job guarantee programs as well. So in case any one of you are looking to transition or upskill, you can reach out to me. I am sharing link of our website in chat section. Apart from this, we run a global community of product managers on Slack. So in case you are not part of it, you can join it. I'm sharing all these link in chat section. And recording of today's session will be published on our YouTube channel. I'll update all of you in our weekly newsletter. So that's all from my side.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Please, I'm on Twitter. I think I shared it here in the end. So I'm also on LinkedIn. So please connect on Twitter. My Twitter is basically all tech and AI related. So anything I find interesting to read, I share. So yeah, thank you so much, Piyush. This was very good for me as well.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.